You know, I believe that's the biggest stumbling block of most people in all religions, is they don't understand why prayer sometimes brings the negative results, or why it generally brings negative results. You couldn't expect anything else, because there's a law that governs that. And the law is that your mind attracts to you the counterpart of the things of the things that the mind is feeding upon. There's no exception to that rule. It's a natural law. There's no exceptions for anybody. So if you want to attract through prayer or otherwise the things that you desire, you have to make your mind positive. You not only have to believe, but you have to put action back of that belief and transmute it into faith, applied faith. And you can't have applied faith in a negative state of mind. The two just don't go together. Constructive mottos are often used by people who recognize what a powerful influence one's daily environment has on the maintenance of a positive mental attitude. The entire industrial plant of the R.G. Letourneau Company, with 2,000 employees, was positivized by placing mottos printed in large letters in all departments and changing them weekly, such as the ones that you see here. Now, those mottos were written for a purpose. Every department in that great sprawling plant of the Letourneau Company, every department had those mottos replaced there regularly, sometimes daily in the cafeteria, and in the other departments weekly. And the mottos are written in the letters a half a foot high, so that you could read them all the way across the building. And believe you me, every time they walked into their department, why they saw that motto. By the way, we had a funny experience with them. I was standing in the cafeteria one day when the motto was placed up. See, the cafeteria was a place where all the men lined up to get their meals at noontime, and we could catch them all there at one time or another during the day. And the motto read, just remember that your real boss is the one who walks around under your hat. Now, I'd think that would be as plain as mud to anybody that would read it. It would mean that you're the real boss in final analysis. But I heard a man let out an Indian yell, and he said, boy, that's what I've always said. I've always known that my foreman was a louse. Now, up at the top of the page there is a method by which one may transmute failure into success, poverty into riches, sorrow into joy, fear into faith. The transmutation must start with a positive mental attitude, because success, riches, and faith do not make bedfellows with a negative mental attitude. The transmutation procedure is simple. Now, here it is. And you can very well afford to come back to this many times and assimilate it and make it your own. Number one, when failure overtakes you, start thinking of it as if it had been a success. Do you think that would be difficult to do? Yeah. You think it would? No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't at all. In other words, thinking of it, what would have happened if it had been a success instead of a failure. Seeing yourself in the success side of the situation and not in the failure side. Start imagining or imaging the circumstances of the failures in your own imagination as being a success. Start also looking for the seed of an equivalent benefit which comes with every failure. And there is where you will be able to transmute the failure into success. Because every adversity, every failure, and every defeat has the seed of an equivalent benefit. And if you go to searching for that seed, you will not take a negative mental attitude toward the circumstance. You take a positive mental attitude, because you're sure to find that seed. You may not find it the first time you look for it, but eventually you will find it if you keep on. That's step number one. Number two, when poverty threatens to catch up with you or has actually caught up, start thinking of it as riches and visualize the riches in all the things that you would wish to do with actual riches. Also start looking for the seed of an equivalent benefit of poverty. I remember when I was a little boy sitting on the bank of the river down in Wise County where I was born, just after my mother had died, before my stepmother came along. I was hungry. I didn't have enough food. I was sitting there on the bank of the river wondering if I couldn't catch some fish and maybe fry some fish and have something to eat. And as I sat there, I don't know what caused me to do this, but I shut my eyes and looked into the future, and I saw myself going away, becoming famous, wealthy, and coming back to that very spot, charging up the river on a horse, a mechanical horse that was run by steam. I could see the steam pouring out of his nostrils. I could hear his horseshoes clicking on the rocks. It was so vivid to me. In other words, I built myself into a state of ecstasy there in that hour of poverty and need and want and hunger. Years passed, and the time came when I drove my Rolls Royce into that very spot, the car that I paid $22,500 for. I drove my Rolls Royce into that very spot. And I went back and imaged again that childhood scene where I had been there in poverty and in want and in hunger. And I said, well, I don't know whether my imaging this back in the early days had anything to do with it or not. Maybe it did. Maybe I kept alive that hope and eventually translated that hope into faith, and eventually that faith brought me not only a steam horse, but something of much more valuable and much more costly than a steam horse. Looking forward and imaging the things that you want to do, transmuting unfavorable circumstances and adversities into something that's pleasant. By that I mean switching your mind away from thinking about the unpleasant things over to something that's pleasant. And then again, number 3, when fear overtakes you, just remember that fear is only faith in reverse gear. And start thinking in terms of faith by seeing yourself translating faith into whatever circumstance or things you desire. I don't suppose anybody ever escapes experiencing the 7 basic fears at one time or another. And most people experience them all the way through life. But certainly if you allow fear to take possession of you and to grip you, it'll become a habit. And it certainly will attract to you all of the things that you don't want. You have to learn to deal with fear by transmuting it or translating it or transforming it over in your mind into something the opposite of fear. In other words, faith. If you fear poverty, commence thinking of yourselves in terms of opulence and of money, and thinking of ways and means that you're going to earn that money and acquire it, what you're going to do with it after you get it. Why, you can daydream, and there's no end to the daydreaming you can do. And it's far better to daydream about the money you're going to have than it is to fear the poverty that you know you already have. I'll assure you, this is no virtue and no benefit in sitting down and bemoaning the fact that you are poverty-stricken or that you need money and you don't know how to get it. I honestly believe that there isn't anything in this world that I need that money can buy or that anything else can buy that I can't get if I want it. I don't think in terms of what I can't get. I think in terms of what I can get. And I've been doing that for a long time, and it's a wonderful thing with which to condition your mind to be positive. So that when the circumstances arise where you need a positive mental action, you're in the habit of reacting in a positive way at all times rather than in a negative way. You don't get a positive mental attitude just by wishing for it. You get it by weaving a cord of the rope at a time, day by day, little at a time. You don't just get it overnight.